afternoon. What a great opportunity to celebrate the accomplishments of our colleagues. And today, Arlene GERONIMUS, who we're going to hear a little bit more about and hear from. I want to thank everyone at our National Center for Institutional Diversity and our Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for making this celebration possible today. Thank you. I also want to express my appreciation to ODE for the many activities that occurred yesterday, which were just phenomenal. And this is a fabulous extension of the 2022 DEI Summit. As you know, we're advancing on our journey to become a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive community. These are core values that we want to weave into our institution's fabric because they're critical to achieving excellence. Our dedication to academic excellence for the public good remains inseparable from our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Throughout the history of our university, we've been proud to be the home to scholars who have advanced our understanding of one another and of the enormous benefits of diversity. So in DEI 1.0, one of our university action items was to establish a career award to celebrate and honor faculty whose scholarship has contributed significantly to our understanding or appreciation of groups that have traditionally been understudied or misstudied in academia. The James S. Jackson Distinguished Career Award for Diversity Scholarship was created in 2017 and advances one of our overarching DEI strategies that is supporting innovative and inclusive scholarship and teaching. This award is named after its inaugural recipient, James S. Jackson. I fondly remember attending that event in his inaugural presentation. His career epitomized the type of dedication and accomplishment that we envisioned in founding the award. The primary goals of the award are to help us build a more robust body of knowledge and teaching in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion while addressing disparities in contemporary society. To elevate these research foci nationally, to provide important recognition for scholars whose work may have been undervalued in the past, and to create a permanent tribute to those who have made significant contributions to scholarship, teaching, and service in issues related to topics such as diversity, inequality, and justice throughout their careers. With this award, we recognize faculty who exemplify our highest ideals and who help make the University of Michigan a great institution. It's now my pleasure to invite Tabby Chavis, our Vice Provost for Equity and Inclusion, and our Chief Diversity Officer to the podium, who will introduce our distinguished diversity scholar. Thank you all for being here today.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Provost McCauley, for your support and your presence here today and for those wonderful remarks. With the James S. Jackson Distinguished Diversity Scholar Career Award, we are celebrating a colleague who has made the university and the world a better place. Speaking of excellence, Professor Arlene T. GERONIMUS is a professor in the Department of Health Behavior and Health Education in the School of Public Health and research professor in the Population Studies Center at the Institute for Social Research, where she is also the founding director of the Public Health Demography Training Program. She also is affiliated with the Center for Research on Ethnicity, Culture, and Health. Dr. GERONIMUS is a national and international leader in population health. She has made unique and seminal contributions to theory, empirical work, methodology, and practice as it relates to diversity. Her interdisciplinary abilities and collaborations have been consistently at the vanguard of several fields, including public health, medicine, economics, political science, critical race theory, and applied anthropology. An elected member of the Institute of Medicine of the National Academies of Science, Dr. GERONIMUS received her undergraduate degree in political theory from Princeton University, her doctorate in behavioral sciences from the Harvard School of Public Health, and completed postdoctoral training at Harvard Medical School. Dr. GERONIMUS originated an analytical framework, weathering, well known to many of us now, that posits that the health of African Americans is subject to early health deterioration as a consequence of social exclusion. Much of her scholarly work is related to develop and testing this structurally rooted biopsychosocial model. Her general research interests include structural and cultural influences on population variation and family structure and age at first birth, the effects of poverty, institutionalized discrimination, and aspects of residential areas on health, the collective strategies marginalized communities employ to mitigate, resist, or undo the harmful effects of poverty and structural racism on their health, the trade-offs these strategies reflect, and the perturbations public policy sometimes cause in these autonomous protections. Dr. GERONIMUS is developing a general approach to disrupting weathering in affected populations through GEDI public health, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, which applies social psychological understandings of the impact of contingencies of social identity, environmental cues, and stereotype threat on the activation of the physiological stress process among social identity groups. Dr. GERONIMUS has worked with the US Civil Rights Commission, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and the Aspen Institute's Roundtable on Comprehensive Community Initiatives to Revitalize American Cities. The quality of her scholarship has been consistently recognized with an award list that encompasses, just to name a few, the School of Public Health Excellence and Research Award, an election to the National Academy of Medicine of the National Academy of Sciences. In addition, Dr. GERONIMUS's weathering hypothesis is the theoretical basis for countless NIH proposals, journal articles, and dissertations by researchers across the globe, and has been applied to a broad range of health outcomes in populations, with implications from fetal life to old age. Dr. GERONIMUS's own empirical work has spanned this gamut and has been sponsored by both the National Institute of Child Health and Development and the National Institute of Aging. In addition to her significant scholarly achievement and contributions, Dr. GERONIMUS has had a deep track record of public service and engagement locally and nationally. For instance, she served on the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, Maternal Mortality and Morbidity Steering Committee, as an expert on the National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparity Science Visioning Panel, which recommends priorities for future funded health equity research across the National Institutes of Health, as a member of President Obama's Healthcare Advisory Committee, and currently sits on the National Advisory Board of the Office of Head Start. Dr. GERONIMUS is a much sought after speaker, and her research has been featured in countless newspaper and magazine articles, including National Geographic, Fortune, and Scientific American magazines, and HBO and NBC News. She has been featured in a 2021 BBC documentary called "Why is COVID Killing People of Color?" She has spoken at numerous community and town hall meetings, local and national radio shows and programs, including NPR's Code Switch podcast. Finally, Dr. GERONIMUS has been a tremendous teacher and mentor to countless members of students. With this award, it is no surprise that people who are engaged in transformational research and scholarship also have been pivotal in engaging next generations of scholars and mentees. Many early career faculty from across the country who are in jobs and leadership roles at prestigious universities credit Dr. GERONIMUS directly for their decision to pursue a PhD. And she is also relentless in her efforts to promote students who may come from positions of disadvantage. She has served on more than 30 dissertation committees, 17 as chair, and served as primary advisor to more than 50 masters in public health students. She's also, as noted, the founding director of the Public Health Demography Training Program at the Population Studies Center at ISR, where her primary objective was to diversify its training cohorts and support trainees focused on population health equity. And that was the short version of her biography. And without further ado, I am pleased and honored to invite to the podium Dr. Arlene GERONIMUS.
Well, I hope I won't disappoint you after that. It's wonderful to see you all here, and I understand there's more people online. So wherever you are in the virtual world, thank you for coming. I also want to thank, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I also want to thank Ellen Meeder, Marie Ting, Janine Patsoris, and the rest of their crew who put this together. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge James Jackson, sorry, for whom this award is named, and acknowledge this is the first award ceremony where for which he didn't live to see. So if we can take a moment in our heads to remember James and all he contributed to the university. Now, when someone is a recipient of a career award, the prerequisites include that they are old and have persisted. And I cop to both of these descriptors. As the first award that I am receiving, in part because I am long in the tooth, I took note that my two predecessors in receiving this award, James and then also Pat Gurin, took the prerogative to include autobiographical stories in their remarks. Now, some of their autobiographical remarks were truly remarkable. Those of you who were there will know that James Jackson talked about the day as a student he got to squire Martin Luther King Jr. around Michigan. Mine are not so remarkable. They're meant as a context for my recommendation that DEI efforts at the University of Michigan tackle the literally life or death challenges our historically underrepresented students and alumni face, however well they succeed academically and later professionally. And they do succeed very well academically and professionally, as I will highlight later. Yes, I did say life or death. You might think I'm being dramatic. My current and former students will tell you that I have a penchant for assigning distressing or infuriating reading assignments, and that my lectures too are on brand. So for the rest of you, and by way of trigger warning, you may want to have a second cup of coffee or whatever it is you'd like to drink. And let me just say, I hope you are infuriated by some of what I am about to say. And I also hope to break your hearts, but only in the way Mary Oliver describes in her famous poem, Lead, which I have excerpts of. Here is a story to break your heart. Are you willing? This winter, the loons came to our harbor and died one by one of nothing we could see. On one shore, one on the shore that lifted its head and opened the elegant beak and cried out in the long, sweet savoring of life. The next morning, this loon, speckled and iridescent and with a plan to fly home to some hidden lake, was dead on the shore. I tell you this to break your heart, by which I mean only that it break open and never close again for the rest of the world. So I've been thinking about what we refer to as DEI efforts in the context of elite colleges and socioeconomic mobility for a long time. I'm gonna have to take my glasses off. I can't see my notes. Okay. After college and prior to entering graduate school, when I was trying to make sense of the world and my place in it, which I have not figured out yet, I worked as an admission officer at Princeton University. My few-year stint fell during the first decade of affirmative action. Those policies took effect, and the college also that semester first admitted me. Well, that's true too, but I was going to say first admitted women. That's why I got in. In that job, I worked actively with the first associate director of minority admissions at Princeton to increase applications and enrollment of minority students. Among those I assisted in admitting and recruiting were Craig Robinson and Michelle Robinson, now Michelle Obama. So you see, James isn't the only one with Forrest Gump moments in his biography. I also assisted in preparing our office's amicus brief in the 1978 Supreme Court case Regents of the University of California versus Bakke. That decision is the one that struck down quota systems based on race alone while leaving the door open for race as a consideration among many others in admissions. Each admission cycle, I read literally thousands of applications and interviewed hundreds of applicants. While most of their names and circumstances now elude me some 40 plus years later, a few made such a positive impression that I remember them vividly. One was a young man named Larry Graham, who applied in 1978 to be admitted to the class of 1983, which he was. Larry was a particularly engaging Black high school senior whose optimism and drive were infectious. My very positive impression of Larry was substantiated by his subsequent accomplishments, as well as by public statements he made as he shifted his career from corporate lawyer to prolific writer, almost always writing on subjects related to race and class. In 1992, he went undercover for the summer as a busboy at Greenwich, Connecticut's country club, all-white country club, where as a fly on the wall, he was privy to racial slurs and the patronizing instructions given by the wealthy white clientele to Black and Latinx workers daily. He began a New York Magazine cover story about his experience by saying, "I'm a 30-year-old corporate lawyer at a Midtown Manhattan firm, and I make $105,000 a year, which would be $222,000 in today's dollars. I'm a graduate of Princeton University and Harvard Law School, and I've written 11 nonfiction books. Although these might seem like good credentials, they're not the ones that brought me here. Quite frankly, I got into this country club the only way that a Black man like me could, as a $7 an hour busboy." In a 1995 interview with the Washington Post, Larry spoke of his experience being Black among America's most highly educated and professionally successful and highly compensated and politically and culturally powerful elite. You have to, you're living in a white world, but you have to hold on to Black culture, he said. You have to please two groups. One group says you have sold out, and the other never quite accepts you. Larry Graham ultimately published 14 books, including Our Kind of People Inside America's Black Upper Class, the inspiration for a TV drama series he worked on as producer until he died suddenly of a heart attack at age 59 in 2021. That same year, I learned of the death of a Black Princeton alumnus I overlapped with and knew way back when from daily student protests against the university's investments in then apartheid South Africa, in which we both participated regularly. Jonathan Smith from the class of '81 died of a stroke at age 62. At the time of his death, Jonathan was professor of American Studies and African American Studies at St. Louis University. He had founded the Slavery, History, Memory, and Reconciliation Project, passing away on Juneteenth, 2021, a day that in his position as special assistant to the president for diversity and community engagement, he had been thrilled to inaugurate as a university holiday that year. I was deeply pained and angry to learn of Larry's and John's deaths, but I can't say I was totally surprised. For my own research from the 1980s and 1990s was among the first wave that documented the shorter life expectancies and healthy life expectancies of Black Americans across all social classes. I had already calculated that while only 6% and 3% of my white male and female Princeton classmates from the 1970s had died up to the year 2019, so pre-COVID, 32% of my Black male classmates were already deceased, and 12% of my Black female classmates were deceased. The modal age of my classmates in 2019 was 62, implying that about a third of my Black Princeton classmates had died prior to age 62. Now, nationwide, as you see up here, I calculated that 16% of men and 9% of women who reached the age of 22 in the late 1970s would die before they turned 62. Well, overall, my white Princeton classmates fared much, much better than these national averages. My Black Princeton classmates fared 1.5 to 2 times worse, despite their advanced education, connections, prestigious professional jobs, and high incomes that the Princeton degree may have opened for them. It could certainly be a coincidence, although Black alumni's overrepresentation among early deaths in our class mirrors findings about their peers at Yale, suggesting otherwise. So what's going on here? Were there excess mortality rates despite their Princeton education, or because of it, or some of both? I don't know a definitive answer, but I think it's imperative for us to find out either way and to do something about it. Well, I don't know for sure what's going on. Aspects of my autobiography, of my research, and the research of HBHE colleagues and doctoral alumni may provide key clues. So I'll start following with James and Pat. I will start with autobiographical clues. As children, I also have children, but they weren't around then. As children, my sisters and I learned not to talk to my father when he first came home from work. As he described it, he was ready to interact with us only after he had a chance to take off his armor. What armor, I always wondered. He worked a desk and laboratory bench job. It was demanding work with life or death consequences for some patients, but it wasn't physical combat. It wasn't until much later that I understood the intricate ways in which decades of direct and intergenerational trauma, coupled with ongoing othering at his job, were taking their toll on him day by day. His parents had fled horrific pogroms in Russia after witnessing unspeakable genocidal atrocities against their family and community. Escaping Russian gunfire with babies in tow, my father's 20-something-year-old parents arrived in the US in the early 1900s. Immigrants to the United States are incorporated into US racial stratification categories that may or may not have had any meaning, most likely not, in their home countries, and regardless of their desire to be so categorized. This imposed racialization shapes their lives in the United States in countless and consequential ways. Historically, racialization of immigrant groups can be fluid as suits the dominant culture or the nation's economy. My father's childhood and early adulthood coincided with the eugenics movement and the scientific racism, and that those are words put together and believed then to be scientific, which should make us all a little humble about what we call scientific. But anyway, that the scientific racism that naturalized it and was propagated at elite universities. At that time, Eastern European Jews were generally classified as Asiatic or Mongoloid in an era when Chinese immigrants were deplored and subject to the Chinese Exclusion Act. In some quarters, Eastern European Jews were described as essentially Negro inhabits physical peculiarities and tendencies. And I wanted to put up the title of the book that made that claim because I particularly like the fact that the subtitle is Being a Study of the Jewish Ancestry from an Impartial Standpoint. And I know we'd all love to be able to subtitle our articles that they're all from an impartial standpoint. It was only in the second half of the 20th century that Eastern European Jewish Americans were invited into the privileged space known as whiteness, to the point that now Black Jews and working class Jews can feel erased or excluded when people think of Jewish Americans. But this was not the case for my father's generation of working class Eastern European immigrants. Both my parents grew up in extended working class immigrant families at a transitional point in American Jewish history, with the racialization of Eastern European Jewish people changing over the course of their lifetimes. Now, my father, and there he is where the arrow goes, my father grew up before World War II in a Yiddish-speaking Eastern European Jewish immigrant ghetto in East New York, which is a part of Brooklyn and now a setting for a brand new TV urban crime drama. My father's upward socioeconomic mobility began when he became a first-generation college student, commuting 90 minutes by subway each way every day from the tenement in Brooklyn where he lived to City College of New York in uptown Manhattan. This was in the heyday of the eugenics movement's power to naturalize explicit anti-Semitism, and when private and elite universities were actively institutionalizing anti-Semitism in their admissions policies, as well as in their racist curricula. Because of this structured exclusion from prestigious white colleges and universities, City College was predominantly Eastern European Jewish student body at that time, statistically more selective than any of the Ivies, and counter to stereotype, a powerhouse in basketball. Not quite as imbued with pomp and circumstance as Hail to the Victors, to his dying day, my father always sang what he told us was his school song: City College, we get knowledge, playing basketball. All kidding aside, it bears noting, and maybe germane to current policy debates, that he was able to achieve his college education thanks to the existence of City College, which was the first free public institution of higher education in the United States, and the extensive investment New York City had made in its subway system. By the way, City College existed and was sustained as a tuition-free college because at that time, immigrants living in New York City had the right to vote. After serving in the Army during World War II, my father attended graduate school in microbiology and joined the ranks of the highly educated. Decades later, I remember him recounting the moment his degree was conferred, that he transitioned from a star student to just another unemployed PhD. In fact, during the McCarthy era, he faced difficulty gaining employment as his entire CCNY graduating class was blacklisted for a time because Julius Rosenberg was a member of their 4,000 member cohort, and that made every member of that cohort suspected of being a communist. Ultimately, my father landed a job directing the clinical bacteriology lab of a major hospital affiliated with Harvard Medical School in Boston. Compared to his parents, he was socially mobile and had acquired tangible elements of white privilege, no question. And again, it bears noting that he was able to achieve his graduate education thanks to the financial assistance of the GI Bill, a type of government subsidy not available to very many women or Black Americans who had served. As such, he was a member of the first generation of Eastern European Jews to, as Karen Brodkin described it, become white. Even as his professional status gave him entrance to an upper middle class income and lifestyle, the contingencies of my father's formative and oppressed social identity remained with him. My native Yiddish-speaking, Brooklyn-bred, highly educated father never felt at home, except when he was literally at home. He spent his white-collar workdays among Ivy-educated physicians and Boston Brahmins, cognitively and emotionally engaged in actively managing his social identity, what he referred to as thinking Yiddish, acting British. Sort of an Eastern European Jewish version of code switching. My father could not be his authentic self at work. He was perpetually alert to the possibility of being stigmatized, discredited, or humiliated if his ethnic immigrant working class roots or City College education were exposed. Now I understand that his armor that he referred to was the heavy psychological weight that came with managing his social identity at work, always defending himself against being viewed as an undesirable interloper, an imposter, or a red menace. Even as he ascended the ranks of American privilege, he was forced to navigate his work environment with a constant sensitivity to being othered, devalued, erased, or ostracized. His self-conscious and ceaseless need to keep up appearances suggests he may have been in a prolonged state of chronic physiological stress arousal. So it may be more than a coincidence, although I only made the conscious connection when I was well into it. It's funny how your parents have this effect on you, you don't even realize, that I have spent my scholarly career originating, empirically testing, and refining what I call the weathering hypothesis, which in effect is a theory about the health impacts of chronic physiological stress arousal. In brief, weathering is what happens to human bodies down to their cells when they are members of minoritized groups who grow, develop, and age in a systemically racist, classist, religiously intolerant, gender binary, xenophobic, or ableist society, to name a few. Weathering, I'm not going to go through this, but I figured I had to show you a slide about weathering. No. Weathering emphasizes health as an emergent capacity that dynamically develops over the lifespan in response to multiple nested and contextually fluctuating socioeconomic, psychosocial, and physical environmental stressors that accrue through one's lived experience. Over years and decades, chronic activation of physiological stress processes has both rapid and enduring consequences for physical health and longevity. Over time, chronic exposure to everyday challenges and threats has detrimental effects on cellular systems, including pathogenic gene expression and acceleration of the cellular aging process. Prolonged exposure to stressors weakens and dysregulates the cardiovascular, immune, neuroendocrine, and metabolic systems, damages vital tissues and organs, increases the risk of obesity, the risk of adverse pregnancy outcomes, the early onset of diseases of aging like hypertension and diabetes, poor immune response to infections, autoimmune disorders, and cancers. In the weathering perspective, depending on one's lived experiences and structural location, relatively young people can be biologically old. That is, through a weathering prism, biological age is conceptualized to reflect the cumulative biological impact of lived experiences from conception to your current chronological age, not only as a developmental marker. Members of culturally oppressed groups weather, no matter their work ethic, their investment in their human capital, or how decently they live, even in part because of how hard they work in the face of structural barriers and barricades. Without taking time to outline all the socially structured biological mechanisms of weathering, the resulting erosion of body systems and increased risk of early onset of diseases of aging and excess death generally involve inflammatory processes. My father died of sarcoidosis in his 60s, an inflammatory disease that affects multiple organs in the body, including the lungs and heart. Well, I won't take time to tell her story. My mother died at age 45 of a very aggressive cancer. Obviously, this N of 2 could be coincidental, but whether or not their specific deaths were hastened by weathering, my research and that of others tells us early deaths such as theirs among members of marginalized or economically exploited social identity groups are not anomalies. The physician who performed my father's autopsy told me that his lungs, heart, spleen, and brain were so damaged that he must have had undiagnosed and untreated sarcoidosis for decades. And given the widespread vital organ damage that ensued, it was surprising he was even able to remain upward towards the end of his life. For years before his death, his body was a Jenga tower, one move away from collapse. So what lessons might this story have, or those of my gone too soon Princeton peers have for the University of Michigan? Perhaps very few. Some might think comparing even flagship public university to the Ivies is comparing apples and oranges. Even if there is truth to that, major state and federal budget cuts of the last decades to public higher education, including to flagship schools, have left schools like U of M to raise tuitions precipitously, increase the proportion of students from out of state, and enhance their appeal to the children of wealthy donors. What impact might this secular trend toward educational gentrification of the student body have on historically underrepresented students? A surprising percentage, a disheartening percentage of whom, in stark contrast to their increasingly privileged peers, experience homelessness or food insecurity during their undergraduate years. Let me say something about my involvement in efforts to diversify the University of Michigan student body, at least in my small corners of the University of Michigan School of Public Health and at ISR. Of my varied DEI activities, the one which I put the most sustained and direct effort was into diversifying my department's doctoral student body. In the fall of 1997, when I was assigned to chair the HBHE Doctoral Admissions and Curriculum Committee, the entering doctoral cohort had 1 student. 8 doctoral students were enrolled in the program at any stage, and there were no students enrolled that year of underrepresented status, as defined by the University of Michigan. In contrast, during the 2003 to 2004 academic year, 6 years into my chairing the committee, an external review of the program noted that 14 doctoral students made up the entering cohort and 42 doctoral students were currently enrolled. Of these 42, 20 students of underrepresented status were enrolled, virtually half of our doctoral student body. While growing the program generally and diversifying it were explicit goals I had for my term as chair, many people in HBHE and the university deserve credit for this revolution in the composition of the doctoral student body. I can't name all who played a role, but I do want to recognize then HBHE professors Woody Neighbors and Sherman James, as well as Earl Lewis, who was then the Dean of Rackham, without whose support, approval, and dedicated recruitment and funding efforts, the success in statistical diversity would not have been achieved. To extend support for doctoral students interested in population health and equities in a department that at that time more heavily emphasized individual health behavior change, I also worked to develop a program in public health demography as part of the Population Studies Center with strong support from its then director, David Lamb. When James Jackson assumed the role of ISR director, he endorsed the program as well, and throughout he participated in mentoring some of its trainees. Its inclusion as a core part of the PSC pre-doctoral training program, along with sociology and economics, has now continued for 20 years, and I am grateful for its continued support from Sarah Burgard, the current director of PSC. 25 years have gone by since Woody, Sherman, Earl Lewis, and I, among other faculty and staff, first self-consciously, cooperatively, and concertedly strove to diversify the HBHE student body and to expand its curriculum. A total of 121 students have graduated from the HBHE doctoral program over this time, and 44 of them are historically underrepresented students. Beyond these statistical successes, the graduates of our program have made important contributions to diversifying the public health scientific workforce, and I need to embarrass some of them who are here by showing you examples of where our students have gone and those who went into academia. We also have many who have gone to work at NIH or the CDC or in other non-academic roles. So these are some of our graduates of color and the schools they're at now. It's quite a crew. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's many of my favorites. Of course, I have no favorites. And also in terms of postdocs, I mentored Javier Rodriguez, who is here today, and now a professor at Claremont Graduate University, and that was funded through the Public Health Demography Training Program. And again, for my Forrest Gump moment, I mentored Tom Leviste in his postdoc here, who is now the Dean of the Tulane School of Public Health. Trained in what I like to call the Michigan School of Thought, under the tutelage of many HBHE faculty engaged in health equity research, Sherman James, Woody Neighbors, Cleo Caldwell, Barbara Israel, Amy Schultz, Linda Chatters, and others across the School of Public Health and the university. And as importantly, and I want to stress as maybe even more importantly, drawing on their diverse personal lived experiences as members of racialized social identity groups, our graduates have produced original and important scholarship related to population health equity. Many of them are here today. I can't tell you what it means to me that you've come. And I wonder if you understand how much I've learned from your continuing research and work. Through the conventional DEI metrics, we might be tempted to pat ourselves on the back and declare victory, but it's not time to go home. In a cruel twist of fate, many of our incredibly talented alumni whose own research has added importantly to the field's understanding of the role of structurally rooted biopsychosocial stressors and racialized health inequities have also faced a disproportionate share of health problems. Since we expanded and diversified the program, we have had 44 graduates of color who would now be between the ages of their early 30s and their mid 50s. I do not know all of their health histories, but I have been made aware of several of them. Several of our doctoral alumni in their so-called prime, young and middle adult ages have suffered severe life-threatening health conditions that might theoretically be associated with weathering. Some of our alumni of color have suffered preterm births of babies who died shortly after birth, while the mother suffered complications that brought them perilously close to maternal mortality. Two of our alumni of color are deceased, including one who made substantial contributions to explicating how weathering and other structurally rooted biopsychosocial processes play out in Latinx immigrants and their first-generation American children. Edna Viruel Fuentes, who died of a particularly aggressive cancer in her early 50s, a huge loss to us in the field. Without a comprehensive accounting, I understand these data are preliminary and at best subjective. But by my accounting, I have estimated that 30% of our Black or Latinx doctoral alumni have died or developed life-threatening diseases somewhere between their late 20s and early 50s that could reflect, at least in part, weathering processes. And if this is not the actual proportion, it is an underestimate. I don't have the full data because I don't know all of them. So the ones I know can only be the lower bound on what percentage have suffered this way. So riddle me this, Batman. What percent of white doctoral alumni from the same cohorts have died or developed life-threatening, potentially weathering-related disease? The admittedly soft estimate I have calculated, again from very incomplete data, for our white doctoral alumni in these same cohorts is 1%. The university is rightly concerned with the mental health of our students and has worked to grow awareness and destigmatize mental health issues while expanding mental health services. Maybe it's time to put comparable energy into the physical health of our students while they are here and also as they become alumni over the longer term. I wish I had time to go one by one through the substantial scholarly contributions of our doctoral alumni toward illuminating the causes and consequences of racialized health inequities. But I will highlight one just because it's particularly germane to what I'm about to say in my closing remarks. This study was led by Cynthia Colin, now associate professor at Ohio State University, which I don't hold against her, and a 2007 graduate of the HVHE doctoral program and the first graduate of the public health demography training program at ISR. Colin and her team analyzed longitudinal data from the AdHealth study, a nationally representative sample of more than 20,000 adolescents who were in grades 7 through 12 at baseline during the 1994 to 95 school year. The researchers compared the risk of developing metabolic syndrome by their early 30s among two groups of Black Americans, those who attended historically Black colleges and those who attended predominantly white colleges. Metabolic syndrome is a cluster of conditions that occur together, increasing one's risk of heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes. Colin and her colleagues found that Black American college graduates who attended HBCUs were 35% less likely to develop metabolic syndrome by their early 30s than Black American college graduates of PWIs, an indication that they were less likely to have demonstrably weathered as young adults. And this was after controlling for many of the things you might think would confound such an association. Those of us here who work and promote DEI at this predominantly white institution should reflect on this finding. I've begun to wonder about the health of our graduates. Is it time for the University of Michigan to systematically collect health data on its current students and alumni? Maybe. The growing literature in my field suggests that predominantly white universities, however well-intended or committed to equity, have at best not addressed the health needs of their diverse students. Through a weathering lens, it is plausible that their lived experiences here or in the professional world that we send them out to may add to their weathering. We may institutionally be contributing, however inadvertently, to further erosion of their health trajectories, and even life expectancy. DEI has been institutionalized as a priority at U of M and can boast many tangible measures of success in and broad commitment to this endeavor. Today's assistant professors embrace DEI activities and are incentivized to do so, which was not how it was when I came here. But are we doing all we can? Important as they are, how many DEI trainings or guest lectures can a faculty, student, or staff member go to before DEI becomes bureaucratized and performative rather than transformative? And how much of the burden of DEI work as we know it falls on historically underrepresented students, staff, and faculty? If the purpose of DEI commitments is to expand the diversity of people who can thrive in the United States, despite the many ways systemic racism, classism, and sexism, among other isms and phobias, continues to limit their access to opportunities and resources, and to contribute to realizing racial justice, surely all who are committed to DEI should be concerned with eliminating racialized health inequity writ large, and also among our students and graduates. In 1928, Zora Neale Hurston alluded to the effect of living in a diverse community, including the impact of attending Barnard College, a predominantly white and elite university. She wrote, "I remember the very day that I became colored. Up to my 13th year, I lived in the little Negro town of Eatonville, Florida. It is exclusively a colored town. But changes came in the family when I was 13, and I was sent to a school in Jacksonville. I left Eatonville as Zora. When I disembarked from the riverboat at Jacksonville, she was no more. It seemed that I had suffered a sea change. I was not Zora of Orange County anymore. I was now a little colored girl. I do not always feel colored. Even now, I often achieve the unconscious Zora of Eatonville. I feel most colored when I'm thrown against a sharp white background, for instance, at Barnard. Beside the waters of the Hudson, I feel my race. Among the 1,000 white persons, I am a dark rock, surged upon and overswept." Investing in one's human capital and achieving economic mobility has its downsides in a systematically unjust society. The term socioeconomic mobility implies movement to opportunity, to a theoretically better life, but it's also moving away from something. Through DEI activities, shouldn't we be at least as concerned with promoting recognition and restorative justice as we are promoting distributive justice through academic achievement and credentialing? Elite universities are classically thought of as bubbles, and the youth who attend them as being offered a developmentally appropriate moratorium from the adverse vicissitudes of life. We can acknowledge the good universities do in expanding the economic, social, and intellectual options and horizons of their graduates, but we can't pretend the real world doesn't intrude on our current students, and some more heavily than others, and also intrude on them as alumni, including through exposure to biopsychosocial stressors in the classroom, the dorm room, and certainly in their so-called real life as they pursue their paths, choosing among the expansive options that a UM degree helps open for them. My father could not be his authentic self at work. I believe that placed a substantial physiological burden on him. Thinking Yiddish, acting British is a catchy phrase, but you just try to do it day in and day out. How many of our students are unable to be their authentic selves here? How many must wear armor? How many get erased or overswept or weathered? And what are the stakes involved in avoiding answering that question? My remarks would be incomplete if I didn't include a shout out to my husband and children who have contributed in more ways than they know to this work and to sustaining me in it, as well as making everything in life worthwhile. Thank you.
Use that one. So we have time for a few questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we will get you a mic. Leo.
Thank you. Thank you, Arlene. As always, that was a very provocative and informative talk. And you're absolutely right. You made us really think and feel about the circumstances that we are in today. And with that in mind, I'm wondering, over the 30 years that you have been studying weathering, what would you say has been the starkest change, or has there been any change in your thinking about weathering and health?
Well, I think my thinking has clearly gotten more nuanced and deeper and spread. I started looking at Black populations, and I looked at many other populations, sometimes inspired by my students who were interested in seeing whether weathering happened in their communities. And unfortunately, it usually has. But what I think has struck me the most is that weathering has gotten worse in the United States over that 30 years. And in particular, the first thing I studied was birth outcomes. And when I tried to talk about that in around 1990 at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, I was roundly discredited by various advocacy organizations and others who thought that by my saying that mothers in their 20s had worse birth outcomes, which was just a fact, that than teenage mothers, that I was getting in the way, I guess, of their attempts to prevent teen childbearing, which was a very big thing there. Now, when I've replicated all those studies now and also done them with maternal mortality, and everything's worse. The teen years remain in the most oppressed communities the lowest risk ages to be a maternal death or an infant death, and the rate at which the risks go up with age is much faster than before. So that's led me to think, in some ways, to feel guilty. Couldn't I have gotten this message across? Because I wasn't trying to say prevent or don't prevent teen pregnancy. I was trying to say, what is it about our world that for Black women, the healthiest time to have a baby is when they're 18 or 19, and that by the time they're in their 20s, it's already multiple times worse. And by the time they're in their 30s and late 30s, as many professional people are postponing childbirth to, it just goes through the roof. And the fact that we have 2 doctoral graduates who have experienced near maternal deaths and infant deaths is an example that just, goes straight to my heart, especially they're both people I admitted to the program and advised. So I just wonder why couldn't people listen to any of this 30 years ago, or why couldn't I be more effective? But I think the time, the time is now. I mean, the time was then, but given we missed that opportunity, I think the time is now. And I've seen that weathering, isn't just an abstract concept, but it's affecting people I know and love. As I said, I at some point realized I think my parents were both weathered. So it's had direct, I was orphaned. It has a direct effect on me. People are claiming they care about things like maternal mortality going up and a variety of other things that are weathering related. But I think we have to dig deeper than we have and not just go with the superficial demographic things about why people, we have to think about the dynamic interactions and their lived experiences with the rest of us. And in a world that wasn't made for them in a variety of ways, including a university that wasn't, and figure out what is eroding their health.
Thank you for that. And if I could just follow up, and look around to see if there are any other hands. But one of the things I've been most impressed with in your application of weathering has been recent around detainees, immigrant detainees, and how you've applied weathering it within that context to be able to demonstrate it had implications even for the policies that were being put in place for this country around immigrants. I'm just asking you to share that story with others who may not be familiar with how impactful that was.
I have two stories that relate to immigrants. I think you're talking about the more recent one, but I will also mention the first one because it does relate to policy directly, which is that when there was a raid on a meatpacking plant in Postville, Iowa, an ICE raid, which was horrific and militarized. Not only did pregnant women who were in the raid lose their children or go into preterm labor, but all Latinas who were pregnant around Iowa and the whole state of Iowa did. And I think people don't understand how we certainly don't need ICE raids and they don't have to be militarized. And it cost, I forget, it was like some huge price tag, 5 million, 500 million. I don't know where the decimal place goes, but it was a very expensive raid. And it led to babies dying or being born too early or too small. And one could surmise, even though what I was studying was birth outcomes, that the not pregnant women, the men, the children in Iowa who were Latinx must have also felt some kind of comparable fear that would have harmed their bodies in a less dramatic or obvious or measurable way. So I think when we have our arguments about immigrants and ICE raids and undocumented immigrants, we should keep some of this in mind. The thing I think you want me to talk about was during COVID. I was contacted by an immigration lawyer who had read about weathering, and she asked me if I would write expert testimony for the many, many detained immigrants who were waiting their asylum hearings and who had not been convicted of anything. Some of them were the people who had had their children taken away from them at the border. I remember one woman in particular whose story was heartbreaking. She hadn't seen her son in 3 years and wasn't sure where he was while she, all that 3 years, was detained. Immigration detention centers were tinderboxes for COVID. And it not only, wreaked havoc within the center and among the people being detained, but it also then got taken to the community from the workers. So the government did decide to let anyone over 65 out of detention because we had learned being over 65 was the biggest risk factor for dying from COVID or getting COVID and getting extreme morbidity from COVID. This immigration lawyer had the idea that if people weather, then a lot of people who have had hard lives or in oppressed groups, and immigrant detainees pretty clearly fall in that category, could be biologically as old as the 65-year-olds. And so I had to read all the cases because there's no class of people called weathered people. So I had to make a case for each one, drawing on their biographies, which is how I know how heart-wrenching these biographies were, and also things about how they were responding to their detainment in ways that were either trying very hard to get out, which is something I learned from Sherman is called high effort coping and John Henryism, and that many people might not think of as a risk factor for weathering because they seem to be on top of things. Also, people obviously very depressed. That was easier for people to understand. But I had to write individual expert testimonies to say what it is about these people's biography, history, and current predispositions to active effortful coping would suggest they were likely to have been weathered. And on the basis of those, they were habeas early release petitions. Last I heard, over 2,000 cases were released from detention who were between the ages of 20 and 50 or 55. And so that was also made me realize that maybe now weathering will be taken seriously or can have an impact on real lives. And I was asked to make this shameless plug. Based on that, I took on the daunting task that I'm not sure was the right thing to do, but I did, of writing a book about weathering that to be broadly accessible, which my publisher says, Little Brown, I should tell you, will be out in March of 2023. So, these experiences, I wanted to say also, even I, who have grown up among weathered and oppressed people, I won't say I was myself, and who have studied this and read ethnographies or done qualitative studies, was so deeply shocked by some of the stories I read in of these detainees. And it reminded me always that however much we're committed to DEI or justice or racial justice or social justice or whatever, if we're privileged ourselves, we really don't know anything about what could be impacting the health of people who are not as privileged. And there was a ethnography done by Seth Holmes, a professor at Berkeley, where he did a participant observation study embedding himself in a bunch of immigrants who were trying to cross the border. And he mentioned a conversation where one of them said to him, right now you are poor, but when you grow up, you'll probably have a luxury house. And so Seth replied, well, I don't really want a luxury house. To which the immigrant or the refugee said, but you will have an inside toilet. And that to me kind of represents this idea of how much we don't know about what are the stakes involved for other people. And it's not about our hearts or our commitment or our intellectual commitment, but how can you make lived experiences better if you don't really have a deep knowledge of those experiences? Which is something I think also our students have brought to the fore, and maybe the best gift they've given the field of public health is they were able, as I said in my talk, to combine a really first-class training with their own lived experiences. And you can teach other people first-class trainings, but you can't teach them lived experiences.
Yes, we'll get you mic.
Thank you. And thank you for your remarks. If I could bring the conversation a little more local. You mentioned you had also done some research in mitigating initiatives. And given that your father could only take his armor off at home, and I assume that the BCU students had to be less armored than a student here, for example. Could you suggest some specific things the University of Michigan could do to catch up to the HBCUs in terms of the health and welfare of their African-American graduates and students?
Well, I I mean, I know this is sort of kicking the can down the road, as they say, but I think we have to focus on it in a way that we haven't. And I do think, as wonderful as it is that DEI is something everybody now is mandated to take part in the university, or the university itself holds it as a mandate. And we have fabulous people like Tabby and others who are dedicated to that and have made incredible strides. I think we have gotten to a place, I mean, maybe this is just me seeing the difference between what things are like now versus when I first came here, when you had to kind of fight to get anyone to even think DEI. Well, we didn't have that term yet, but affirmative action or inclusion in other ways was something worth thinking about. I think now what we do is I alluded to this in my remarks, we're really at risk of kind of bureaucratizing DEI and making it turn into that you made sure to go to all of your trainings or your lectures. And I don't want to say that's all bad. Part of how you get something done is to make it part of the incentive structure. And so I'm not dissing on that, but I do see the possibility that we'll miss other things like these, what to do to make this place more hospitable to its students of color by sticking with only those other kinds of things. And I also don't want us to forget about another policy issue, which is funding for public education. As I said, I think this kind of educational gentrification is an understandable reaction of the university and many others to having lost a lot of their public funding. So I also think there are things to do related to changing that, that would also have ripple effects of the kind you like. But I can't tell you very specific things we should do, but I think we should figure it out.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to have this opportunity to have more of a discussion with you. And thank you for your questions. Gonna move us on to actually presenting the award. Sorry about that. Yeah, I want to thank everyone who asked a question. They just generated a wonderful conversation. Now, in addition to the traditional plaque that we're going to present to Arlene, O'Day and NCID, in cooperation with the Penny Stamps School of Art and Design, sponsored the first ever art and design competition where Michigan students proposed and created original artwork to be presented to the recipient of the James S. Jackson Award. And for this inaugural art and design competition, the winning design was created by Sarah Stillwell, and we're lucky to have her with us today. So this past May, Sarah completed her PhD in the combined doctoral program in education and psychology. And she's currently a School of Public Health Research Fellow in Health Behavior and Health Education, which is very serendipitous because that's Arlene's department. And completely, it was completely serendipitous. Sarah's work centers around perceptions of wellness, educational efficacy, and safety, particularly among historically marginalized populations. Through her research, teaching, mentorship, and advocacy, she strives to understand and reduce systemic inequities. And so I'd like to invite Sarah to the podium to tell us about her inspiration in designing and creating this piece of artwork, which you can see right here.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Dr. Cole, and so much for your incredible lecture. It was thought-provoking and just an incredible way that we really should be thinking about all of these issues on a more regular basis. So just a few brief remarks regarding my work. It's my honor to present my mixed media composition entitled Dismantling Our Ivory Tower in recognition of the James S. Jackson Diversity Career Award for Diversity Scholarship. This piece is inspired by the evolving demographic landscape of the ivory tower, academia, and to those who can, should, and will belong. Borrowing from the traditional format of broadside printing, It is intended as a call to action for diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. At the same time, this composition examines whose responsibility it is to do so by questioning who has traditionally been esteemed in positions of power. This work invites viewers to critically engage in conversation about our role in reshaping our ivory tower. What role can we play in reimagining and restructuring the backdrop of higher education without shying away from investigating comprehensive tenets of DEI? In this work, each pillar is represented through multidimensional layers composed of repurposed materials, an ode to the necessity of accessibility of materials and redistribution of wealth and power. Life experiences and obstacles overcome by individuals and collective stories are expressed by those who view this piece. The experience of engaging with this work calls the individual to take a proactive role in collectivist DEI efforts rather than passively viewing. When looking at this composition, contemplative spaces offer the opportunity for us to see and imagine ourselves in the continuing work and the progress of DEI. Through this work, I aim to promote the idea that we can embrace differences as a fundamental pillar of success to promote DEI and to challenge how we view ourselves as agents of change and progress within the ivory tower and beyond. One of the layers of the work includes a poem, an excerpt from which reads, "The notion of nodding off novices does nothing but neglect new perceptions and policies and procedures to suppress systems of stagnation by saluting sameness. Somehow, status-starved scholars shrug off societal stratification, superficially subscribing to the sacredness of celebrating sacredness. Lack of objectiveness offers oppression and humors obsolete ideas by ostracizing outsiders and outcasts, outing the others. And the higher we climb up our ivory tower, the greater we fall. And the higher we climb up our ivory tower, the more we gain. And the higher we climb, we abandon the pain, the put downs, and we put on the pantsuits and we pardon the persistent patriarchy. We even the playing field and we create a new turf. Enough is enough. This is our tower." So reflecting on the lecture, all of the incredible speakers and opportunities we have today, I invite you to question, what is your role? What is our role in dismantling our ivory tower? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Your design's a creative and wonderful representation of diversity to honor Arlene and her distinguished career. As the provost mentioned in her remarks, the James S. Jackson Award is a career award to celebrate and honor faculty whose scholarship has contributed significantly to our understanding or appreciation of groups that have traditionally been understudied or misstudied in academia. In addition, this award elevates and recognizes the work of scholars here at Michigan who've used their intellectual power to further the understanding and combating of injustice. Scholars who focus their research on issues that change society and on educating our students who will lead us to a better world. This distinguished award for diversity scholarship was named in 2017 for its inaugural recipient, James S. Jackson. James passed away in September 2020. He was a beloved mentor and an extraordinary scholar who touched the lives of many, and I'm sure many in this room. His academic legacy will continue in the work and lives of his students, as well as in the recipients of this award. Today's honoree, Dr. Arlene GERONIMUS, has spent her career producing science that's of unquestionable value to our society. Like James, Arlene exemplifies our highest ideals of what we strive to do as a research university. We seek to strengthen knowledge itself by understanding that the convergence of students, faculty, and staff from all backgrounds leads to better research, better teaching and learning. And we seek to create a campus that serves and is welcoming to all. This is the work of the University of Michigan. And as you heard about today, this is the work of Dr. Arlene GERONIMUS. So I would like to now invite Provost Lori McCauley and Vice Provost and Chief Diversity Officer Tabby Chavis to the stage to present the University of Michigan's James S. Jackson Distinguished Career Award for Diversity Scholarship to Dr. Arlene GERONIMUS. Arlene, would you?
This is.
So this has just been a wonderful event, celebrating the transformational work of Dr. GERONIMUS. And I want to thank everyone who's here, both in person and virtually, for joining us today. But for those of us who are here, I would like to invite you to a reception that will be held just outside these doors. And we also have a book where you can share tributes to Arlene. So thank you for being here, and please share some time with us to celebrate Arlene and her work. Thank you.